The dirtiest and most dangerous jobs of the Middle Ages. A boring history tale for sleep, by the glow of a low fire. Under the weight of thick wool blankets once, long ago, when candles were more common than clocks and towns were little more than huddled clusters of timber and stone, people lived close to the earth, and often closer to filth. This is a story not of knights and nobles, but of the other people. Those whose days began with stink and ended with sores. The ones who kept the wheels of medieval society turning, often from beneath them. Let's begin with the foolers. In the dim gray of dawn, the fooler would rise and step into a trough, filled with water and aged urine. Collected from neighbors and strangers alike. Stored in barrels that stank, even when sealed. Urine, rich in ammonia, was the key to cleaning wool. The fooler would stomp and press the soaked fabric with bare feet, all day, in rhythm to the quiet complaints of their joints. Their job, to scour and thicken woolen cloth. Their gift, aching legs, raw skin, and an ever-present smell that lingered long after sunset. From the fooler's trough let us turn to the gong farmers. The gong farmer was not a farmer at all, but a night worker of the filthiest kind. As the village or city slept, they would descend into cesspits, lantern in hand, to scoop and haul away human waste. The pay was decent by peasant standards, but the cost was steep. The job was dangerous. Toxic fumes could kill, the walls of the pit might collapse, and disease clung to every touch. They worked alone or in pairs, and no one invited them to supper. Next comes the tanner. A tanner dealt with death in its rawest form. They worked with hides, fresh from the slaughterhouse, scraping off blood, hair, and tissue. To soften and preserve the leather, they used a mix of dog dung and animal brains, soaking hides in vats that curdled the air. Their hands were stained, their clothes stiff with dried bile and lye. They often lived outside town walls, by law or by odor. And then there was the executioner. His face, if seen, was rarely forgotten. Many towns kept only one, a man both necessary and despised. He took life as part of his profession, wielding axe or rope, sword or fire. He was both feared and isolated. Sometimes his children could not marry within the town. Sometimes he had to execute friends. Sometimes no one spoke to him unless it was their last moment alive. For those drawn to the sea, there was the rat catcher and leech collector, whose work could kill them slowly. The leech collector waded into bogs and marshes, letting bloodsuckers cling to their skin. They might use animals, or bare legs, staying still in the muck while parasites fed. Infection followed. Some lost limbs, some simply rotted away. And for a bit of quiet horror, imagine the plague barrier. When the Black Death rolled through, the bells didn't ring for the dead. There were too many. Whole families gone. Streets lined with bodies. The plague barrier would pull cart after cart, collecting the fallen, unceremoniously dumping them into mass graves. They wore masks stuffed with herbs. Few survived long enough to retire. So now, as you lie back, warm and clean in a safe, quiet room, picture the candle guttering in a tanner's hut, the splash of urine in a fooler's trough, the muffled groans in the dark of the plague pit. History was not kind. But it sleeps now, like we do. Under dirt, under dust, and soon, under dreams. The lime burner, if you were born unlucky and bold, you might have become a lime burner. They worked with chalk or limestone, heating it in large kilns until it turned into quicklime. A substance so caustic that just breathing the dust could scar your lungs forever. One mistake, one gust of wind, and you could go blind, or worse. Lime dust settled into every wrinkle and fingernail. It burned holes in clothes. It burned holes in people. But it was needed for mortar, for tanning, for medicine. So someone had to do it. They usually didn't last long. The treadmill crane operator in towering cathedral towns, high above the market stalls and pigs in the streets. A man might be locked inside a massive wooden wheel, like a hamster in a cage, turning slowly, endlessly. He was the power behind the crane. Inside the wheel, the operator walked forward to lift stone blocks, beams, and other massive materials. The work was dizzying and precarious. Sometimes the platform collapsed. Sometimes the wheel snapped. Sometimes the man fell and no one even knew his name. But the church would rise. The relic seller, this one, strangely, was not always lowborn. A relic seller dealt in sacred objects, or claimed a thorn from Christ's crown, a splinter from Noah's ark, a saint's tooth. Some were real, most were not. They roamed from town to town with locked boxers and charming smiles, selling salvation by the ounce. But it was dangerous work. If caught peddling a fake relic or mocking the wrong saint, punishment came quickly. Whipping, imprisonment, sometimes worse. And no one wept for a fraud who got boiled in oil or strung up for blasphemy. They were easy to believe and easier to hate. The alchemist's apprentice. To serve under an alchemist was to gamble with your skin and sanity. You weren't just grinding herbs or boiling roots. You were distilling mercury, inhaling arsenic, and stirring lead with bare hands. Alchemists sought gold, yes, but they also sought life, purity, spirit, trapped in matter. You were the one doing the work. And sometimes, you didn't come back from the fume-filled cellar. Or you did. Changed. Skin pale. Eyes wrong. Voice not quite the same. They said some were touched by angels. Others whispered demons. The sin-eater in some rural corners of Britain, when someone died, especially suddenly, or sinfully, the family might call a sin. He would come quietly, always alone. He would sit beside the corpse, eat a piece of bread, drink a mug of ale, and absorb the dead person's sins. For a few pennies, he would take the weight of someone else's guilt into his soul. No one thanked him. No one talked to him. No one invited him to weddings. But they always needed him, and no one knew where he buried the weight of all those sins. Maybe it was in his eyes, or in the earth. The plague doctor, though iconic now, with that long beaked mask and dark robes, the plague doctor was not a figure of science, but of desperation. Often poorly trained, sometimes little more than barbers or scribes. They were hired to record deaths, not cure them. But they walked where no one else would, through infected homes, into crowded plague carts, touching the fevered and the dying. They stuffed their mask with herbs, lavender, mint, wormwood, to ward off bad air. They carried long staffs to lift bedclothes or prod bodies. The mask protected little, the robe even less. They lived alone and died alone. But someone had to bear witness to the dying, and someone had to write down their names. The tooth drawer before dentists. There were tooth drawers. They set up in market squares and loud festivals, under painted banners with toothy grins. You could hear them before you saw them. The screaming, the clink of coins, the shriek of iron against bone. With pliers, hammers, and hooks, they pulled rotten teeth in front of gawking crowds, paid in copper and spectacle. There was no anesthetic, no sterilization. Sometimes they pulled the wrong tooth. Sometimes they shattered the jaw. Sometimes the patient died of infection. But by then the show had moved on. The leper watcher lepers were feared and cast out, but they didn't vanish. They lived in colonies beyond town walls, and someone had to care for them, or at least, watch them. The leper watcher was appointed by town council, usually a low-ranking guard, punished for something minor. He would patrol the borders of the leper house, enforce curfews, make sure none wandered into the town. The job paid poorly and cost everything. Most watchers fell ill. Or worse, were blamed for what they saw. Rumors clung to them, that they consorted with lepers, that they were lepers themselves. They were not allowed in inns or churches, not truly part of the town, not truly part of the out. The Resurrection Man. By the 1300s and into the early Renaissance, the study of anatomy was rising, but bodies were scarce. Enter the Resurrection Man. Under the black sky, he would sneak into graveyards, shovel in hand, and unearth the newly buried. Corpses were sold to universities, surgeons, and sometimes fresh ones fetched more coin. Some were commissioned, some were stolen. He had to move fast. Grave soil was heavy. Coffins sometimes collapsed. If caught, the punishment was severe: beatings, mutilation, hanging. But if he was good and quiet, he earned well, and left no trace, except the empty grave. The night watchman. And, finally, let us follow the night watchman. He walked the sleeping streets, lantern in hand, calling the hour, midnight, and all is well. But it often wasn't. He carried a staff, and sometimes a horn. He checked doors. He put out fires. He kept a quiet eye on drunkards, thieves, and shadows. But the greatest fear was the unseen. Some said night watchmen vanished without noise, that strange shapes followed them, that some returned mute or mad, that in the darkest hours, before the bells rang, the old gods walked the alleys, testing locks. The watchman walked anyway, because no one else would. Now you've heard the soft steps and shallow breaths of those who lived in the quiet margins of history, the darkened professions, the whispered lives. And still, your bed is warm. Your breath is clean. The dangers are long gone, buried with those who bore them. Sleep now, deeper still beneath the surface of medieval belief, into the quiet crackle of terror dressed as ritual. The fire has burned low, and the shadows on the wall move slower now. You are safe. But centuries ago, safety was a lie people whispered to themselves in the dark. This is the hour for rituals, superstitions, and bedtime omens, the strange, the solemn, and the soft-voiced fears that ruled the world after sunset. The night terrors of the faithful. Before you closed your eyes, you whispered a charm. Everyone did. Bless the bed, the boards, the beams. Let no soul walk where no soul should be seen. For many, the night was not a time of rest. It was a time when the dead stirred, when witches flew, when demons sniffed beneath door cracks, waiting for someone to sleep without prayer. Every village had its own sayings. Every cottage had a different arrangement of iron nails hidden in the beams, or rowan twigs tucked beneath pillows to keep things out. In some places, people placed bread and salt at the threshold, to distract ghosts, or appease old gods. No one knew which. But no one slept without it. The witch pricker, when a woman spoke out of turn, when a cow died suddenly, when a child took ill with no cause. There was only one solution: a witch pricker. He came with a leather bag and cold hands. Inside the bag were needles, pins, awls. His job was to find the devil's mark on the accused, a place on the skin that would not bleed, would not feel pain. A sure sign. They stripped the accused, shaved every inch, and pricked them. Dozens of times. Hundreds, if needed. Sometimes they found the mark, sometimes they didn't. But the result was always the same. The fire waited, and the witch pricker was paid, either way. The midnight bell. In some villages, there was a bell that was not rung for time or warning. It was the death bell. It tolled only at night, after the breath had left a body, to warn spirits nearby not to take more than one soul, to announce to ghosts and devils that this death was done. and the house was sealed against further grief. 3 soft tolls, 1 pause, 3 more. People listened from their beds, eyes open in the dark. If they heard 4, they would not sleep at all. The corpse candle and the dead cart before someone died. The signs came. Corpse candles, dim blue lights flickering near the floorboards, or small fires seen down long corridors where no fire should be, or dreams of black dogs sitting beside your bed, watching your breath rise and fall. When someone finally died, the dead cart came. Not all towns had them, but when the plague came, or the famine, or the cold, the cart rolled down the cobbled streets before dawn. The collector would knock once. The door would open. The body, wrapped in linen or not at all, would be loaded silently. Sometimes the cart creaked under the weight of more than just the dead. The sleeping position of the blessed, you never slept face down. That was how the damned were buried. You never slept with your feet pointing toward the door. That was called the death's path. The way the soul walked out of the house. You kept 1 candle lit, even if it guttered. Even if the wax was expensive. Because a room without light invited things that moved without breath. You covered mirrors. You covered bowls of water. And you never looked under the bed after midnight. Not because something might be there, but because if it was, it would see you. Now the fire is ash. The wind is still. And even the ghosts of memory sleep lightly. The strange beliefs of the past were not madness. They were comfort. A way to feel some power over the dark, even if it was false. And now you lie in a different world. No death cart rolls past your home. No witch pricker sharpens his tools outside. But still, perhaps tonight, place a little salt on the sill, just in case. Sleep comes. The night deepens further, folds itself over the world like a wool shroud. The fire is gone now. Just ember and memory. But you're still warm, still wrapped in quiet. So let us go deeper, further down the winding corridors of forgotten time. You've heard of rituals and death carts, witch prickers and corpse candles. Now it's time to listen to the softest, most chilling stories of all. The final confessions of the condemned. This is what they whispered just before the rope pulled tight, just before the flame touched the straw, just before the masked man gave the signal. They spoke to priests, to guards, to shadows, to no one at all, and all of them hoped somehow that something would listen. I saw the devil in the woods. Confession of the miller's daughter. Her name was She was 17, and accused of bewitching the town baker's wife into madness. A scapegoat, likely, but the priest demanded confession. In the candlelit cell, she whispered, "It wasn't me, it was him, the man with no shoes. I saw him once, in the woods. He didn't blink. He smiled with too many teeth. He said, 'Just say yes, and you'll never be hungry again.' So I did." They burned her at dawn. The town baked bread with her ashes. It rose, perfectly. Too perfectly. The Iron Mask weeps final words of a torturer's apprentice. The apprentice had no name on record, only the boy. He worked for the royal interrogator, sharpening blades, heating irons, cleaning the rack. One day, he snapped, strung at his master with a red-hot chain. On the scaffold, he laughed, then sobered. He made the Iron Mask cry, you know. The one they say shows no pain. But I saw it, dripping, screaming. The mask wept. So I set it free. And now it's waiting for all of you. They hanged him upside down. The mask was never used again. It rusted, but never dried. There are more graves than people. Whisper from the gravedigger. Old Joran dug graves for 41 years. He was quiet, simple. Until one night he was found digging a grave for someone still alive. When caught, he said softly, "No, not for them. It's not for them. He was hanged for attempted murder. His last words: "I only ever dug graves when I was told. But lately, the ground tells me. It says it's hungry. It says, dig, 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 dig. I think we buried too much. I think something underneath is full now, and wants more." His grave collapsed 3 days after he was buried, and kept collapsing every time they tried to refill it. The man who would not die, the warden's note. This was not a confession, but a warning. It was found in the prison of Black Hollow, scratched into the inside of a wooden table. He came in on a cart. Robber, murderer, they hanged him. I saw it. I cut him down myself. Buried. Next night, banging at the gate. Same face noose still around his neck. Laughing. We hanged him again. Branded his tongue. Buried him deeper. 3 days later, I heard him whisper through the wall of my cell. "You keep burying me, but I'm already inside." There was no name. Just the initials MD. The prison collapsed 2 winters later. No bodies recovered. Tell her I remember the song. "The Fire Witch of Marrow Hill." They said she sang while they lit the pyre. A lullaby. Something old. The priest demanded a confession. She refused, until the flames reached her feet. Then she whispered, "Tell my daughter the song works." It still works. The crows came just before dawn and scratched my name into the sky. She'll know what that means. The next week, 6 townspeople were found dead. Eyes pecked out. Crows circled 4 days. And every rooftop in Marrow Hill had one word etched in claw marks. Listen. These were the final words. Words said not for salvation, but for remembering. The condemned had little hope. No rescue. No pardon. But they spoke anyway. To the dark. To time. To us. And now, as you lie beneath layers of comfort and silence, you carry those whispers, just like the old walls did, the old woods did. Just like the wind still might. The tools of medieval torture, and the songs they sang, they were not merely instruments of pain. They were messages, symbols, rituals. Every torture device had its own purpose, its own rhythm, and, in the silence of the chamber, its own song. Not music, but sounds you never forgot. Let us open the heavy wooden door, step into the stone-walled chamber of truth, as the church once called it, and see what waited within. The Judas Cradle. The song of descent, it sat in the corner like a stool, with a sharp iron pyramid on top. The condemned was suspended above it, often naked, ropes tied under the arms or knees. Then they were slowly, gently, lowered onto the point. Not to pierce, no, not at first, but to stretch, to tear. This was not a scream-inducing moment. It was long, silent. The weight of the body did all the work. The song, it sang. A faint creak of rope, a whimper, a drop of blood hitting stone. Drip, drip, drip. They say the worst part wasn't the pain. It was the waiting, the Pear of Anguish. The song inside, used most often on those accused of heresy, blasphemy, or unholy lusts. The device was shaped like a flowered bulb. It was inserted into the mouth, or worse, and slowly cranked open, widening, splitting, breaking things not meant to open. The song it sang, metal on metal, slow and grinding. The wet snap of cartilage. A gagged scream. The priest reciting Latin softly over it all. No one ever used it twice, because no one survived the first. The breast ripper. The song of Ratatouille made for women, mostly. Iron claws, forged to latch, heated in fire. Pull. Sometimes they used it as punishment for adultery. Sometimes, merely for rumors. Its song was short. violent, the hiss of searing iron, the snap of the clamp, the scream, always brief, because the shock was too sudden. They say the walls remembered that song, especially when sung at midnight. The rack, the song of stretching silence, perhaps the most infamous. The victim lay flat, ankles tied, wrists bound, rollers at both ends. With each turn, limbs were pulled farther apart. The pain was not immediate, not sharp. It was slow. Tendons tearing, joints unseating, the breath catching, the song it sang, the groan of old rope, the quiet gasp before the shoulder dislocates, the pop of hips leaving their side, and often sobbing. Confessions came quickly, but the turning never stopped, not until there was nothing left to stretch. The heretic's fork, the song of stillness, a simple device, a two-pronged iron rod, one end placed beneath the chin, the other against the chest, or collarbone, or tongue. It prevented the head from moving, even to sleep, even to nod, even to weep. If the victim moved, the prongs would impale them. The song it sang, nothing. Silence was its melody, the kind that made men lose their minds by dawn. The chair of spikes, the song of waiting. Iron, covered in spikes, back, seat, armrests. The victim was strapped in tight, sometimes heated from beneath. No immediate damage. But the pressure, the weight, the duration, the song it sang, the hiss of coals, the slow drip of sweat hitting iron, the groan of skin tearing when they moved even slightly. Sometimes they confessed before the fire was even lit. These tools were not only weapons, they were performances. Each one had its own tempo, its own voice. And the torturer, he was not just an executioner, he was a conductor. They called him the voice of God in some courts, but in truth, he was merely a man with keys. And time. Now, as your eyes grow heavier, imagine how quiet the towns were above those chambers, how close normal life carried on. A baker sold bread, a mother sewed, a child cried, not from pain, just from hunger. And just below them, the rack turned, the pear opened. And the truth, real or false, spilled out in screams and blood. But none of that is near you now. You sleep in a world of clean sheets and locked doors. No confessor waits. No fire glows beneath a chair. Still, if you hear rope creak in a dream, if a drop of water falls onto stone in rhythm, if your jaw aches when you wake, well, some songs echo long after the concert ends.